For years, I was the person searching to be on somebody else's platform. That had never been provided for me. So I thought, you know what? Why not be that person for people?
Welcome to Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You, the podcast that focuses on Christians that are active in everyday life. Join in as we speak to everyone from successful business owners to educators to athletes about their faith and how it helps them reach out and revolutionize those around them to do the same. And now get ready to roar with your host, the voice of manifestation, John Fuller.
Hey, Roar Nation, this is Jody Holland from episode 2. As you may have noticed already, because you're all very smart, we have flipped the microphone around to the other side, and we're going to be doing a backwards interview. I'll be interviewing John Fuller today, looking at his journey and where he has come from. So, John, I've got a question for you. Are you excited and ready to roar?
Let's do it, baby!
Whoop, whoop.
Come
All right,
on.
here we go. So this should be a whole lot of fun. I want to start off similar to one of the things that you've done in your traditional interviews. Tell me, John, what's your favorite verse or your favorite quote?
I'd have to go. This is interesting. So this has been almost a lifelong verse. When I was 15 years old, I got a tattoo with my dad in a house. Don't recommend what I did. Definitely go to a tattoo. It was in some guy's kitchen. I ended up getting a tattoo at 15, but on my arm.
First prison tat.
Yeah, it was my first prison tat, exactly. And anyways, I got the scripture, Proverbs 16:3. And at the time, it was it's an NIV translation. It says, "Commit the Lord what you do, and your plans will succeed." And that has been an interesting verse for me because at the time, at 15 years old, with zero life experience, and in my head, I had all the experience I needed as a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
And 20 years later, I would say that obviously the meaning of that scripture has changed dramatically, but it has been a foundational scriptural for me.
That's awesome. So it's kind of one of those sketchy situations that ended up being a life moment that actually did have an impact on you.
Yeah, it really did. It's kind of funny when I think back doing that with my dad. We got the same tattoos, except I put a scripture in mine.
There you go. That's awesome.
Yes.
All right. So I have a question for you. What was it that made you decide I'm going to start a podcast?
Man, that's a great question. So I was going through a conference about finding purpose. I've been on that journey for a lot of years. That's just been my heart and finding my place in this world. And after going through the conference, there was kind of one word that I had got was my one word, I guess, was the voice of manifestation. And I remember leaving this conference and I was like, man, Lord, what does that mean? What is the voice of manifestation? And I was searching around, and I had just taken a Strength Finders test with the book that I recommend for people. And one of my strengths was communication. And there's 5. That was one of them. And the voice of manifestation, I remember seeing a online deal about podcasting, and it kind of intrigued me, and I got into that. And just kind of had this aha moment. I was like, man, that is it. Because the purpose of the podcast, what I wanted to do, which I felt I've never had the opportunity, was a platform. And I think for years, I was the person searching to be on somebody else's platform, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it makes sense.
Okay. And that had never been provided for me. And not that maybe that's just not God's will, whatever, it just hasn't come up. So I thought, you know what, why not be that person for people? And at the time I was going to a large church and I saw a lot of talent around me that wasn't being utilized in different areas. And I thought, why not provide that for people? Why not be that platform or that stage for people and interview people to where they could come on and thousands of people could hear what they're doing, whether they were a big ministry or small ministry. And the very thing that I couldn't find for myself, I thought, why not be that for other people?
That's pretty cool. I mean, when you think about that shift in perspective, a lot of times I think God puts us in a position where we have that desire So the desire is, God breathed into us. We just don't always know the process. And so you just had to wait until that process was laid out in the right manner so that it would push you in the right direction.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I remember, golly, this is probably 10 years ago, maybe a little less, but I had asked the Lord, I was like, God, what have you made me to do? What did you call me to do? And I'm having this conversation with God, and he's like, if I was to tell you right now, you would just chase after that. And then later on in another conversation, he said, I haven't even been able to place the right people around you yet for what I have for you. And at the time, I'm like, well, that doesn't make any freaking sense. I mean, that just made me more frustrated. But now forward, 5-10 years, I realized that there was a lot of key people in my life that I needed to meet first before I even stepped into podcasting. And on top of that, 10 years ago, I don't even think podcasting existed. So there was even technology had to catch up to what God had for me, which is really an interesting thought in itself.
Yeah, one of the things, I was having a conversation with my younger daughter last night, and she was really upset about something that happened. And I said, sweetheart, you've got to remember, God always has a plan. And sometimes the plan is for you to learn a lesson and for you to grow. It doesn't always feel good when we're learning our lessons or when we're waiting for that right time. But if we just trust that God has us on that right path, then he puts the right people, like what you were saying, the right technology, and the right circumstances in front of us so that we can succeed.
Exactly. I think the hardest part about that is living in a microwave society.
Everything's instant.
Yes. And even in our minds, though, we think, hey, I'm ready for this. Like, hey, God, I'm ready for this. Set the stage. Let's go. And one of my all-time favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Joseph. And just the fact, and I should say Old Testament Joseph, not New. And the fact that God called him to be second in command of all of Egypt. And he was called to this amazing position, but yet he had so much maturity to do. But everywhere that he went, he always prospered. But on the outside, we would say, like, if you were going through the situation, so like if you got thrown in jail and got accused for rape and all the things that he went through, I would probably sit back, or most people would sit back and be like, man, Jody's sure screwing that deal up. And we would say all those things, right? Because that's just a tendency that we have from the outside. And it's easy to read that story and say, oh, well, that's what God was doing in his life, and that was the process. But so many of us overlooked that in our own lives, that it is a process. And we have a lot of maturing sometimes to do before God ever puts us in the position that we need to be in.
I would agree. I think that's also why God gave us the example of the disciples. I mean, these are like the worst of the worst people during that time. Murderers. It's funny that they put tax collectors with murderers. and then all of a sudden he takes these people and has what I would call a but God moment. You think they're on this path, they're this awful person, but God can change the direction of the whole thing in an instant. And I think that's the part, like you say, from a worldly perspective, we look at people and we want to just say, well, that's who you are. But the simple truth is we don't know what's going on inside of people, and we don't know what God's plan has been for those people. So when we open up and respect people for who they are and the journey that they're on, there's always something for us to learn from them.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So my next question for you is, I know that throughout your life, you've had some aha moments, from businesses that you started very young to things that you've learned throughout your life. What are one or two of your aha moments that have really helped to shape you into who you are now?
It's funny you ask me these questions, because I asked, for the last 6 months, I've been asking these questions, and you would think I'd have them all on the tip of my tongue, but I don't. One of the biggest aha moments that I would think would be in the last couple years is, at the time I was working for a guy, and it was really a hard situation. I literally had just lost $1 million company overnight. I went from making really good money to broke. And I'm working for this guy, And I'm just bitter because, honestly, I got treated like crap. And just the whole situation wasn't good. And I was really frustrated. And at the time, I remember going to a mentor of mine, and I'm just like venting. I'm like, man, this guy did this, and he's doing that, and he's changed my pay, and all these things. And I was just really getting treated what I felt was unfair. And my mentor sits there and listened to me for a while. And he says, I really think you need to listen to this book. And he hands me a book by John Verbeer called Honor's Reward. And I was open to it. I'm like, hey, man, if I got heart issues, I'm all for it. And I'll read it. And, if God speaks to me, I'll do it. So the gist of this book was just honoring people, and especially your boss, especially friends, just a culture of honor, period. And I think we've lost that in society. And I grasp that. And I go back to work, I read this book, and I'm like, you know what? No matter how I get treated, or no matter how I get talked to or belittled or whatever happens, I'm going to honor this man because he's my boss, not because I agree with him, not because of anything else besides the fact that God has placed him over me because he's my boss. And I'm going to honor him, and I'm not even going to talk bad about him. And that was hard. And I kid you not. Oh my gosh, dude, that was such a test for me. And the moment that I decided to make that shift, and I'm going to be, whether you want to be the better person or whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to choose to do the right thing. Literally, the atmosphere changed at my work, and I got treated differently because, honestly, I think I was putting out a different, whether you want to call it a vibe or energy. I hate using those words because they're kind of new age, and people are like, oh, I don't like those words. But essentially what I was putting out, I was getting.
Yeah.
And when I changed, or reaping and sowing, that's what you want to call it. So I started sowing better seed in the workplace, my attitude, the whole deal, and it literally changed. And that was a huge aha moment for me. I got to share one more real quick. So its second one is I was doing contract work for a friend of mine who does state jobs for handicapped people. And over the course of time, I'd gotten frustrated because they're just not jobs that we typically do for my construction company. And I didn't like doing them. And a lot of times they're dirty. They're a lot of work sometimes for a little bit of pay. Just all the way around, I didn't like them. And I started having a bad attitude about them. And I even was kind of rude to my friend. And God really just spoke to me and was just like, this is not just your friend, but I gave you this business. And I really had to check my heart on this situation. And I could tell my friend was frustrated too. And I went back and I apologized. And I said, hey, man, I've been wrong and I've just had a bad attitude. I'm sorry. And I started treating his business no different than I would treat my own. And when I did that, I kid you not, literally within a month, Lowe's, the national account for Lowe's had called me up and asked me for my local area, for the Amarillo area, asked me to start doing all of their bathroom and kitchen remodels. Now, what's funny, most people would pursue that. I got a phone call out of nowhere and asked me if I would be interested in doing their jobs because they found me online. They liked my work. They liked my reviews. I had a lot of good reviews for what we did. And it was literally like God showing me, hey, if you'll take care of other people's stuff and respect them and treat them right, I literally got blessed within like 30 days. And I didn't do it to get blessed. I did it because it was the right thing to do.
Well, and, biblically, we are called to work as if we're working for the Lord.
Yes.
And so from that respect standpoint, I think a lot of times God's just waiting for us to get out of the way so that the blessings can flow. I was reading a book about, you're the voice of manifestation, but talking about manifesting good things in our life. We're advised in the Bible to ask and receive. It doesn't say ask and maybe if I get around to it, I'll take care of you. But the part that we miss is that when you ask, a portion of that ask is that you are giving all of yourself in that direction. So just like what you've done with this podcast, you've given all of who you are into creating a podcast that helps other people so that the blessings will come to you. You didn't do it specifically for the blessings, but that's what opens that floodgate for the blessings to come to you. And I think that's the thing, is those points in your life, what you've seen is that the blessings were always sitting right there waiting for you. And it wasn't until you got out of God's way and did what you were supposed to do that all of a sudden now you can be blessed.
And I think the other thing, too, that I just want to tag onto that is when we step into what we're called to do, whether it's like a lifelong thing or even a seasonal thing, that when we step into purpose and how we were created, then all of a sudden doors just literally start opening up and God's favor just pours out. But it's a matter of stepping into that and taking the faith to say, hey, I'm going to move in that direction because that's what God has for me.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes.
So with this podcast, I think just my observation from an outside coach here, you've stepped more and more into that purpose that was designed specifically for you, and the doors have kind of opened up. I mean, you've interviewed some fantastic people. Sean Bowles was a very recent one. I think I've listened to that thing 4 or 5 times now. Paul Young, I know I listened to that one at least a half a dozen times. I've learned about people in different ministries. I've learned about people in marketing. I've learned about people that are musicians. So you've taken this from all these different angles, not just I'm only talking to people that are X. But you've opened it up to try to figure out, how have people become authentically themselves? How have they found God's purpose in their life? So tell me 1 or 2 lessons that you've learned from different podcast episodes that have impacted you.
I'd say the one biggest takeaway that even from Paul Young, who wrote The Shack, there is Dr. Clyde Rivers, who is the ambassador to a nation in Africa. I'm trying to think who else. There's been several, but there's been one specific reoccurring theme. It didn't dawn on me until going several episodes down, but the one reoccurring theme was people just said, I obeyed God. Yeah. And what it was is God would speak to them and they're just like, okay, oh, yes, Lord. That was finally, I think there was a lady, and it just Gooding. I just totally lost the name. It was an episode. She has the ministry, Yes, Lord. But all of them have the same thing. They're just like, I felt like God told me to do X, and it didn't make sense, but I did it. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like all these things just start opening up. Whether it's a ministry, Dr. Clyde Rivers becomes an ambassador to a nation in Africa, which like that is a total crazy story. Paul Young. Dude, that's a crazy story. The guy writes the book out of obedience to his wife. So that one is funny.
On a train, no less, back and forth.
Yes, on a train. So his wife says, hey, I feel like you need to write this book for our kids. He wrote the book to share his heart to his kids and his view of God and stuff like that. And it turns into, he's sold over 25 million books. But every single one of them was an act of faith and just saying, I'm going to step out and just do this because I feel like I'm supposed to. And because of that huge doors have opened. So the biggest advice that I would give, you didn't ask me for advice, but I'm giving you advice anyway.
Yeah, go for it.
So the biggest advice I would tell my listeners is just, if you feel it on your heart, it doesn't even matter if it fails. Like, that just is not even the point. Like, we do things, they fail anyway. I've done tons of businesses, different things that have failed, but just do it. Because you might be going in the direction of, say, podcasting, and then all of a sudden you end up becoming a speaker or a writer, or you get to go on a crazy adventure to another continent. Like, who knows what kind of doors could open up. Just do it because of the fact that is what you're supposed to do.
Right. And I think that's that level of obedience is the same theme that's throughout the Bible. When Jesus is recruiting the disciples and says, put down your nets and join me. And one of them says, but I need to go bury the dead. Well, and in that time, anyone over the age of 70 was considered, quote unquote, dead or on their deathbed. So I doubt that his father was actually dead. And Jesus responds, let the dead bury the dead. So let those people take care of themselves. Either follow me or don't. And that's the part, I think your advice is dead on when you start thinking about it, where you go, okay, I have to act out of obedience so that God can bless me. And it's not wait and see what happens. And if God makes all the right people show up in your life, then you take action. It's take action so that his command can be fulfilled.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that too. I was reading Genesis lately about the story of Abraham, and his faith, his obedience is counted as righteousness to Abraham.
Yeah.
That was the Old Testament, because God's like, hey, pack your stuff. You're going on a trip. You're leaving this land. You're going to that land. And that was counted as righteousness. He just stepped out and said, all right, Lord, if that's what you got for me, I'm going to go do it. And he becomes the father of nations.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such an important thing, all occurring even through the Bible, whether Old Testament, New Testament, is, hey, whatever God has for you, he knows specifically because he designed you for a purpose. You might not know what that is, but he does. If you'll just step into it, doors are going to open up.
Yeah, but it's the stepping in that makes the difference. Until we decide I'm going to move forward, then there's no momentum for God to work with.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part because it's scary.
Yeah, isn't it though?
Yes.
I think, though, that's a fantastic aha moment or a learning moment from your podcast. And it's the same theme that I've seen is we must act, and we must act out of obedience in order for God to work through us. So one of the things that you ask people is, say, sometimes you look at what your greatest strength is, and that strength can also be a weakness. So tell me what you think one of your greatest strengths is and how it has created some struggle for you as well.
Oh, gosh, dude. Yeah, that's funny. So I feel like my biggest strength is communication. So I like to talk. And I have I feel like a good capacity to keep in touch with people. I get to do that because I have a lot of drive time checking on jobs and stuff. So I'll call friends. Hey, how you doing? Just checking in. So I like to do that part. It's easy for me to talk to people. So the downside to that is I'll just give you an example. I've dealt with this since I got married. My wife has to bring it to my attention. But I think we were at a restaurant we were at a retail store. We're checking out. And the girl behind the counter, I was just like, hey, how's it going today? And just started talking to her like I would talk to anybody and didn't think a thing of it. And as we were leaving, my wife was like, you realize if I wasn't there, that girl would have thought that you were hitting on her. And I was like, I had to think about this for a minute. And I was like, well, I guess. I was just like, I was being just friendly. And she's like, I know you were being you, and that's great. She said, but you need to be really cautious around other women. And we've had this talk 100 times in 18 years. So I knew where the conversation was going, and she was 100% right. And, but sometimes within my strength, my wife, I joke around, sometimes she has to be the Holy Spirit for me. And she has to remind me like, hey, you need to reel that in because I can be over friendly and come off the wrong way, which obviously could get any person, doesn't matter male or female, in trouble, I guess.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That makes sense. So, yeah, and you're definitely a gregarious kind of guy. You put yourself out there. You like to connect. So that can be easily misinterpreted, particularly in this world where a lot of people are not great communicators. So a lot of people, somebody actually talks to them like, oh, my gosh, they must love me.
Yeah, and I've been married for 17, going on 18 years, and the last thing I need to do is give somebody the wrong view of me or make me think that, and then they're like, hey, John sure is friendly. So the word I'm going to throw out there, because somebody asked me to use it, they would think I was wackadoodle.
I don't know if that one's actually in the dictionary. It's probably on Wikipedia, though.
Yeah, it might be in Wikipedia, but they will think I was wackadoodle if I was hitting on them. So anyways, I had to throw that word out there for a friend.
There you go. I'm glad you got that one worked into the podcast.
I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but it just popped up in my head, and I thought, man, we could throw this in here somehow.
So next question I've got for you is, I know that you've been working on a book. I've read a bunch of what you've got out there. You look like you're about halfway done at this point. So tell me a little bit about the book. What's the title? When do you expect it to come out? What's it about?
Okay, so I would have to go into some of my testimony, which we won't do, or we can or can't, depending on how you ask questions. But this has been a process over my entire life, is finding purpose. But I believe within finding purpose, you got to change some things in your life. So I've read a lot of books over the years, and sometimes they stick, sometimes they don't. And actually, you were a great inspiration for me to sit down and get my thoughts out of my head, because the thing that I understand best is construction and remodeling, because I've done it for 18 years.
Right.
And when we were talking, another one of those aha moments is I was like, man, life is exactly like a remodel process. And that was the perfect story or analogy for the book. The book is about the same. If I was to walk into your house and remodel your bathroom or kitchen, the same things apply. We have to demo it. We got to tear stuff out. After we tear it out, we need to look at what we're dealing with. There's blueprints involved as far as the direction of what we want it to look like.
Yeah.
There's a contract involved as far as what am I willing to pay for it? What's the price? There's so many things.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. So there's so many things involved there. And I thought, wow, this goes perfect with a life remodeling process. So this book is going to be something about remodeling your life and going through the process of the whole time we walk through the process of how we do that as if I was to remodel your house.
Very cool. So basically, you're going to take it from that same approach of something that people can relate to that's real life. So parable format, just like I think Jesus was the one that used that.
Yeah, he was pretty good at it.
Yeah, connect the dots there. One part that you said really stuck out with me, though, and that was the price point. And I think that's one of the things that people forget when they're trying to change their life is they go, okay, God, I don't want to give up anything. Make me better. And so there's nothing that they're giving in order to get a better life. And I just don't think that exists where you give nothing and you get something in return. You have to give up the old so that the new can exist. Is that kind of what that's saying?
Yeah, exactly. So, even a biblical term, sowing and reaping, Emerson's Law talks about you have to give up something to receive something. And within that, so perfect example is I've walked into people's houses before and they're like, hey, I want to remodel my entire bathroom. Say it's not a very big bathroom. And they're like, I want to tear everything out. I want to retile it, tear out the tub. I want to do new tile, new countertops, granite countertops, new sink, new cabinet, new toilet. I want to texture the walls, paint it, do all that stuff. And I'm like, all right, yeah, absolutely. No big deal. And we go through the process and then I'll ask them, do you have a budget in mind? And they're like, yeah, I was thinking I want to do this for like $2,500. And automatically I'm like, okay, whoa, you've been reading too many books and this is maybe for $2,500. Maybe you could scratch the surface yourself, but that's not likely. Not likely. That's just not even realistic. And that is the thing that I think so many people need to realize is, like you said, they want to go before God and they're like, hey, fix this or fix me or do this. But the thing is, they're not willing to pay the price of what it's going to take to get from A to even C. Like the process of, forget A to Z, just A to C is hard because they're like, B is too hard. I can't do it. But then yet they sit there and complain about they're not where they want to be, or just like people want to complain about, well, I want my house to look beautiful. Well, great. I want it to look beautiful, and I would love to help you make it look beautiful, but there's a price that has to be paid, whether it's money or time. One of the two have to happen. So anyways, that's one of the things we talk about in the book, and is just walking through that process. What are you willing to give up to get the very things that God has for you? Because he has the very best for you, but you're going to have to give up something to receive his best.
Yeah. One of the other parts that I liked, and you let me skim some of it, was right after that when you were talking about building your reasons for moving forward. So as a part of that contract, having them outline what are my emotional reasons for moving forward and what are my logical reasons for moving forward. So they build that desire. And to me, that's, thinking about when people have gotten saved in their life, all of a sudden they've got this tremendous emotional desire to do the right things that they've never done before. And then if they don't back it up with the logical framework that says, I'm going to support myself, I'm going to surround myself with the kinds of people that move me forward, if they don't do those kinds of things, the logic and the emotion, then the emotion wears off and they end up backsliding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you hit on a great point is, when I got saved, I was 20. And I made a radical shift in my life. I literally, and this isn't for everybody, so I want to be really cautious when I say that, because everybody's journey looks different because the Holy Spirit and God knows you specifically. But my journey was, I just had the wrong people hanging around me. I had the wrong group of friends. I was making the wrong choices. I literally cut all of my friends off. I stepped away from what was comfortable, and I ended up being a loner for a couple years. That was my choice because God had to, back to the concept of remodeling, God had to rewire me on the inside. So he stripped me down. So he took the sheetrock off of my life, got me down to the bare studs. And then I was able to see that my wiring process was messed up and I had the wrong things. And God did the process of years of rewiring who I was, finding my identity in him, reading the word, getting the right mentors, getting the right friends, the right structure and framework. And that's just so important because people just don't realize that we've heard what birds of a feather flock together and iron sharpens iron. So another man sharpens another. I'm pretty sure I totally hacked that scripture in Proverbs, but that's okay. You can find it.
It's close enough.
But it's close. It's close enough, but I hacked it. But you get the gist of what I'm talking about. But people just need to realize there is a price. God has the best for you. And all through the Bible, you cannot show me anywhere where when God takes something away, he doesn't give something better. And when we would catch that and realize when I'm willing to give up the crap in my life that is just not from him, that I've decided to hold on to, the baggage, the luggage, whatever, when I'm willing to give it up, he's going to give me something better in return.
There you go. I think that's a journey that you've been on. I'm excited. I think you told me that book should be out by February 1st, last week of January, something like that.
Yes, really excited about that. We're looking in February. We'll be talking about actually doing a conference with you in January 27th, I believe. Yes.
That's correct. Friday.
Yeah, finding purpose. So we'll be hitting some subjects on that. And then possibly we'll be talking about the book some more and then leading into a conference possibly this summer.
That's fantastic. Man, I'm excited about where you're going. I'm excited about what you're doing. I think it's making an impact on the world around you. One last thing I want to talk about here is that I know that you have been able to kind of pray into people's lives and start hearing a word from God, kind of translating God's will for other people. Tell me just one of the secrets from the perspective of prophetic or whatever you want to call it specifically, but tell me one of the things that's different in the New Testament versus the Old Testament. You covered this with Sean Bowles. And then tell me one of the things that you think has been really cool for you in putting yourself out on your Facebook page doing some of that.
Yeah, so that was a total step of faith, doing it on the Facebook page, just because for years I've done it in church. I've done it in the public workplace, but that was like one-on-one. So it's not like there was a ton of people around. On Facebook, I think one of the videos I did's had over 1,000+ views.
Oh, man.
So that was pretty cool. But to go back to your question, so the difference between Old Testament and New Testament. So Old Testament prophecy looked a lot like, I would say, like calling people out on their sin. I always think of like David, when Samuel goes to David and he basically says, hey, man, you're sleeping with Bathsheba, know what you did, you're in sin, calls him out on it, which was great because David ends up repenting and turns back his heart back to the Lord, does the right thing. So growing up, I say growing up, but, at 20 when I started going to church, I went to a very charismatic church. People call it prophetic. I like to just call it hearing God's voice, because here's the thing. You get into prophecy, the problem is people just have a bad taste in their mouth because of that, or it sounds weird for some people, depending on denomination that they've come out of. But New Testament is totally a different type of prophecy or hearing God's voice, because as Christians, we are supposed to sound like the Holy Spirit. And what does that look like? That's encouraging, that's loving, and that's speaking life into people. Because here's the deal. At the end of the day, I know what crap I have in my life. I know what I know what I need to deal with. I mean, I don't need you or somebody else to come say, hey, you're doing this, and this wrong. I'm like, hey, man, I already know that. Maybe some people don't, but I do for the most. And I think most people.
I think we all do.
Yeah, I think we all do. So what I love about prophecy or hearing God's voice is that God knows how he designed us. He knows how he made us. So just like Apple knows exactly how they made the iPhone, okay? So if I call them up in customer service, they can tell me exactly how, well, maybe not them, but an engineer can tell.
Yeah.
Take that back. The engineer of the company can tell me exactly how the phone's made. And when I hear God's voice, whether it's for my life or somebody else's, he knows exactly how he designed them. And it's my job to say, you know what? I want to see the gold in people, because every day we turn on the TV, we go to work, and people, there's just so much negative in the world. I want to be, as a New Testament prophetic person, hey, God, what are you saying about this person? What is the gold that's in their life? Because God knows the gold. And sometimes people need to be reminded about how amazing they really are, about how God designed them. So what I do is I sit back and say, God, what are you saying about this person? And I am able to speak life and how God sees them and how he loves them. And I speak that into people. And that is our job for hearing God's voice for our life and for other people, is to speak about the gold and the richness that is in people's life. Because I think what it does is it raises the bar in people's life. And all of a sudden you're like, really? You see that in me? And then all of a sudden it just connects. My spirit connects with that. And I'm like, wow, that is who I am. And it automatically, it just puts this fire in you, and you want to strive to be that. Why? Because that's who God says you are.
Yeah. So basically, your Are You Real podcast, the website, the coaching that you do, the speaking that you're doing, the book that you've written, being the voice of manifestation is about finding the gold that God created in each person, bringing it to the surface, cultivating it, and allowing people to unleash their potential that God always had for them.
Absolutely. I mean, you're great with words, Jody. You that really would package it. And going back, one of the things that I didn't realize is, going back to your question, is one of your strengths. And again, one of my strengths has always been, I've always seen potential in people, because I grew up so bad that I've been able to see what God is capable of doing in somebody's life. And because I've always said, if he can do it in my life, he can do it in yours. So that has been one of my strengths, is to take the lowest of lows, people who most would say that is a worthless project, or I would never even go there. I'm like, man, bring it on, because God has got gold in that person, and I want to see that shine. So, but the flip side of that has been, is I've been let down many times. I've been hurt many times because of that. And people haven't come into their full potential yet. It's going to happen. But because of that, sometimes, I think about, hey, what is the price you're willing to pay? And sometimes that price has been more than I've wanted to pay. But at the end of the day, I don't think it matters, because I learned a lesson out of it, but I was still able to speak life into that person, and someday they'll step into it.
Well, and just like Mother Teresa once said, people are mean. Be nice to them anyway. You're going to get cheated. Trust people anyway. I mean, it comes down to the choice that you make. Will you follow God's will? Will you be obedient regardless of the circumstances that you're in? And just like you were talking about with Abraham and a host of other experiences or stories throughout the Bible. Our job is obedience. Our job is not full understanding. It's to take that step over the threshold into the life that God wanted us to have, not to look down on the city and go, but God, the giants are so big, we can't beat them. He took you through the desert. He freed the people. He did all of that. And you're still going to question whether or not he's capable.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm sorry, Joe. I'm laughing right now because I just read that story last night. And I'm laughing at that because it is so funny, because even in the midst of all that, so think about what God did. He splits the Red Sea. Chariots of fire go after Egypt. He drowns their enemy. They don't even have a fighting chance in the world.
Right.
It completely annihilates the strongest army in the world at that time. Takes them to the other side. Then they complain that there's no food. So then God feeds them. There's no water, so he provides water out of a rock. Quail automatically show up. There's manna from heaven. God constantly provides in the midst of all their whining, and then yet they still whine. And I'm like, it just shows you that our nature, I guess it's comforting to me, because even at times you can look at it, we all do that at some point in our life. And that's okay. I get it. Yeah. And I've been that person. But at some point, you have to grow up and say, okay, God, you got this. I'm all in. Let's do it.
Yeah. You've got to use the talents that you were given by the master, or you don't get to keep them.
Yes. That's a big one. You know, that's okay. So last story real quick I want to share with you. But if anyone's familiar with Reinhard Bonnke, he's an evangelist. He's been around for years, but he does crusades in Africa, and literally 1 million people show up. So to give you an idea, Amarillo is like 250,000. So it would take 4 Amarillos, all the people, to show up to one crusade. Okay?
That's unreal.
Yeah, it's hard to even wrap your mind around 1 million people at an event. So I heard one time a story, somebody asked him, they were like, you know, what did God, I can't remember exactly how the story went, but somebody asked him, like, you know, how does it feel to like to be God's chosen person to do all this? You know, who were you? And I think his heart was kind of getting puffed up. He was like, yeah, I'm the man or whatever. And God speaks to him and says, you weren't even my first pick. And he's like, oh, well, surely I was your second, right? And God says, you weren't even my third or fourth. And you talk about a humbling experience. I mean, he's having this conversation with God, and he says, but you were the only one willing to step out in faith and do it. And I was thinking,
it's that action.
Oh my gosh, dude. I mean, think about that. He's reached millions of people in his as an evangelist. That guy walks in his gift, without a doubt, which is evangelism. He's touched millions of people. All I could think of is how many, like, what about the guy that was second, third, and fourth? Or woman?
Yeah.
It doesn't, guy, man or woman, it doesn't matter. Like, somebody missed out on a huge calling in their life, but he was like, hey, man, I'll do it. And God rose him up to the occasion. He stepped into it, and now he's touching millions of people because why? He was the only one willing to do it.
And I think that reminds us that it's not us doing, it's God doing through us.
Yes.
God is looking for that conduit to make something amazing happen. And he can only do that if we take the cap off and allow him into our life so that he can flow through us. So
absolutely.
I love it, man. You have really given some cool stuff to the Roar Nation.
Yeah, baby.
I know you're doing some awesome stuff out there, even beyond the podcast. So I encourage all the listeners, if you've not gone to arureal.org, you need to do that. You need to find Are You Real on Facebook. Make sure that you can catch some of those live videos, the Voice of Manifestation. And without a doubt, be watching for the end of January, 1st of February, when John's book, DIY Remodel Your Life, will come out in print. You'll be able to find it on Amazon.com as well as on his website. So, John, thanks for letting me guest host a podcast interviewing you. Hope you've had fun, and thanks for your enthusiasm.
Thanks, brother.
That's all for this episode of Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You. Be sure to go to rureal.org for your free questionnaire to identify your gifts and talents and how you can use them to help people become leaders and catapult them into their destiny to help others become the leaders of tomorrow. We appreciate you spending your time with us and look forward to helping you reach out and revolutionize next time on Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You.